My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 52 years old, and the day my mother's will was read, my own children sat across from me and decided out loud that I no longer belonged to this family. We were seated around a long oak table in a quiet law office outside Charleston. Polished floors, neutral walls, the kind of place where people pretend they're calm while calculating everything they might lose. My older sister smiled the entire time, the polite kind of smile, the one that says she already knew how this would end. The attorney cleared his throat and began reading what my family called the important part. My sister was awarded the house, the land, and nearly $8 million in liquid assets. There were nods, soft congratulations. My son even squeezed her hand. Then the lawyer looked at me. There was no envelope, no check, not even a summary page. My daughter leaned closer to me and whispered, "It's okay, Mom. You always said you didn't care about the money." And that's when my sister spoke. She didn't look at the lawyer. She looked straight at me and said, "Mom made it clear you were already taken care of. She didn't want you fighting us over things you didn't earn." The room went quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't correct her. I just sat there listening to my own life being rewritten by people who had already spent years deciding who I was allowed to be. Then the attorney closed the folder and stood up. "There is one more document," he said calmly. "It was not shared with anyone in this room, and it was not meant to be." That was the moment my sister's smile cracked. That was the moment my son stopped breathing. And that was the moment I realized my mother had been watching all of us far more closely than anyone imagined. Before we go any further, I want to say this. If stories about family, betrayal, quiet revenge, and the kind of truth that surfaces when it's too late to hide sound familiar to you, make sure you subscribe to this channel now. You might not be able to finish this story in one sitting, but you won't want to miss how it ends or the others like it. Let me ask you something. Have you ever sat in a room full of people who shared your last name and realized you were the only one who never knew the rules of the game? Because what my mother left behind that day wasn't just money, and the most devastating part of her decision wouldn't be revealed until much later, after the documents were opened, after the lies were exposed, and after the people who thought they had already won realized they had never understood the will at all. The lawyer asked if everyone was present. No one answered. We all just nodded, as if speaking might break something fragile in the room. I sat at the far end of the table, hands folded in my lap, listening to the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint scratch of pen against paper. My sister Margaret sat across from me with her back straight and her legs crossed neatly at the ankle. She wore pearls my mother used to save for special occasions. That alone should have told me something. My son Daniel sat beside her. My daughter Claire was on my other side. They looked calm, comfortable, like people who already knew what was coming. The attorney began by summarizing my mother's estate. He spoke slowly, carefully, the way professionals do when they know emotions are close to the surface. He talked about the house by the river, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio my mother had built quietly after my father died. When he announced that Margaret would inherit the house and the land, my sister let out a breath she had clearly been holding. She didn't smile this time. She simply nodded as if confirming a reservation she had made long ago. Then came the numbers, $7,800,000 in liquid assets. Margaret reached for the edge of the table. Daniel smiled at her. Someone murmured congratulations. I waited. I told myself not to expect anything. I told myself I didn't need it. I told myself that at my age, money was less important than peace. The lawyer finally looked up at me. Evelyn Carter, he said. For a brief moment, I thought there might be another page, another envelope, something I hadn't seen. But he simply paused and then continued. There are no direct assets designated to you under the primary will. The words landed gently, almost politely, but they hollowed the room all the same. Before I could speak, Claire leaned toward me. Her voice was soft, meant to comfort. It's okay, Mom. Grandma always said you were independent. Margaret let out a small laugh. Not cruel, just confident. Mother believed Evelyn already took her share, she said. She helped her years ago. She didn't want things to get complicated. I looked at my children. They didn't look surprised. They didn't look confused. Daniel avoided my eyes. Claire gave me a tight smile, the kind you give when you think someone else is being unreasonable. I realized then that this conversation had happened without me. Somewhere, at some point, in rooms I was never invited into. I could have argued. I could have reminded them of the years I put my life on hold. The weekends I drove back and forth to help my mother after her surgeries. The checks I wrote quietly when bills came up short. But I didn't, because something about the way Margaret spoke made it clear this wasn't about facts. It was about permission, and I hadn't been granted any. The lawyer closed the folder. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Before we conclude, he said evenly, there is an additional document. Margaret frowned. Daniel shifted in his seat. This document, the attorney continued, was sealed at your mother's request. It was not shared with any beneficiaries, and it was to be opened only when all immediate family members were present. Margaret leaned forward. There must be some mistake, she said quickly. Mother never mentioned. The lawyer raised a hand, not unkindly, but firmly. She anticipated that reaction. My heart began to pound. Not with hope, with something sharper. The attorney reached into his briefcase and removed a thick envelope, still sealed. He placed it in the center of the table, right where everyone could see it. I was instructed to read this aloud, he said. In its entirety. No one spoke. Not Margaret, not my children. I suddenly understood that whatever was inside that envelope, it wasn't meant to give. It was meant to reveal. And as the lawyer broke the seal, I had the unsettling feeling that my mother had arranged this moment not to divide us, but to force us to finally see each other clearly. As the lawyer held that sealed envelope in his hands, my mind drifted somewhere else, entirely, not forward, backward, because families don't fracture in a single afternoon. They crack slowly, quietly, in moments no one thinks to document. Growing up, Margaret was always the easy one, the organized one, the daughter who knew how to say the right thing at the right time. She stayed close to home, married young, had children early. She hosted holidays, posted photos, remembered birthdays. I was the one who moved away, not far, but far enough to be labeled busy, far enough to miss lunches and school pickups, and the kind of daily presence that turns into unspoken authority over time. My mother never said she resented that. She didn't have to. Every conversation carried a gentle reminder. Well, Margaret handles most of that now. You know how hard it is for her. It's just easier this way. Easier became permanent. When my father passed, I offered to manage the paperwork. I had the background. I understood finances. My mother waved me off. Oh, no, sweetheart. Margaret already started. She's so good with details. That should have bothered me more than it did. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need control to feel connected. I told myself trust was enough. But trust works best when information flows both ways. Over the years, my visits became shorter. Plans changed last minute. Phone calls went unanswered. Your mother's tired today. She had a headache. It's not a good week. I learned to stop pushing. Margaret, on the other hand, always seemed to be there at the right time, always had photos, always had stories. She would send group messages with pictures of Mom smiling at lunch, holding one of the grandchildren's hands, sitting in the garden. "She's doing great," the captions would read. "She says hi." I believed them. Because why wouldn't I? Sitting in that law office, watching my sister's composed expression, it struck me how little of my mother's recent life I actually knew. I couldn't remember the last time I spoke to her alone, without someone else nearby, without someone helping. I glanced at my children. Daniel stared at the table. Claire shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. It dawned on me then that they too had been receiving a version of the story I had never heard. Margaret's version. The lawyer cleared his throat again, but still didn't open the envelope. "I should clarify," he said, "that this additional document was prepared several years ago. It was revised twice." Margaret stiffened. "Revised?" she asked. Why would she need revisions? He didn't answer her directly. "Your mother requested that I keep detailed records of all changes, conversations, and correspondence related to her estate," he continued. "She was thorough." That word landed differently now. Thorough. I thought about the times I sent emails that went unanswered, the voicemails that disappeared into silence, the holidays where I was told not to come because it would be too stressful. I thought about how easily I accepted that explanation, because it was easier than imagining something darker. Margaret crossed her arms. "This feels unnecessary," she said. "We've already settled things." The lawyer looked at her calmly. "Your mother did not agree." My heart began to race, not with excitement, with recognition, the kind that arrives late after years of misplaced trust. I realized then that this envelope wasn't meant to change the outcome of the will. It was meant to change the narrative, to explain why decisions were made, and why certain people were never told the full story. The lawyer finally slid a finger under the seal. Paper rustled softly, and before he read a single word, he said something that made Margaret's face lose its color. She anticipated that some of you would say she was confused, or influenced, or mistaken. He paused, so she made sure to leave proof. I felt a chill move through me, because proof doesn't exist unless someone expects to be doubted. And in that moment, I understood something that would haunt me long after we left that room. My mother hadn't been protecting herself from strangers. She had been protecting herself from us. The lawyer broke the seal carefully, as if whatever was inside might bruise if handled too roughly. The sound of paper separating felt louder than it should have. He removed several pages, neatly stacked, clipped together at the corner. Not handwritten, typed, formal. Margaret leaned forward again, her confidence thinning at the edges. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Mother never mentioned anything like this." The lawyer didn't look at her. "This document is a codicil," he said evenly. "It was drafted to amend specific portions of the will without replacing it entirely." I watched my sister's jaw tighten. She knew what that meant. The lawyer took a breath and began to read. "To my daughter Evelyn Carter," he said. For a moment, I didn't realize he was speaking to me. I had already accepted that my role in this room was finished. I looked up. Margaret froze. The lawyer continued, "I leave full ownership and controlling interest of Riverbend Holdings, including all associated investment accounts, operating capital, and intellectual property, to be transferred directly and solely to Evelyn Carter." The room tilted. Riverbend Holdings wasn't a small account. It wasn't sentimental property or an old savings bond. It was the quiet backbone of my mother's finances, a private investment entity she had started years ago, long after my father died. It owned rental properties, commercial leases, several long-term investment portfolios. Margaret let out a sharp laugh. "That's impossible," she said. "Riverbend was never meant to be." The lawyer lifted his hand again. "Riverbend Holdings was established exclusively in your mother's name," he said. "It was never co-owned, never shared. and it was intentionally kept separate from the assets already distributed under the primary will. I felt my pulse in my ears. I had known about Riverbend only in passing, as something my mother handled with help. Margaret's help. My sister shook her head. She wasn't in her right mind when she did this, she said quickly. You know, she was older. She relied on us. She didn't understand. She understood, the lawyer interrupted calmly. He adjusted his glasses and continued reading. I am fully aware, he said, quoting my mother, that certain family members believe Evelyn has already received enough. I am also aware that information has been shared with her selectively, often through others, and sometimes not at all. Claire's breath caught beside me. Daniel shifted in his seat. My mother's words kept coming. I have noticed patterns. Messages unanswered. Visits discouraged. Decisions explained to me after they were already made. Margaret stood up. This is manipulation, she snapped. You're reading into things that... The lawyer didn't stop. I do not believe Evelyn abandoned this family, he read. I believe she was slowly removed from it. The room went silent. No one defended Margaret. No one interrupted again. I thought of every call that went unanswered, every plan that fell through. Every time I told myself I was imagining distance that wasn't really there. My mother hadn't imagined it. She had documented it. The lawyer paused, then continued. Riverbend Holdings represents the work I did quietly, deliberately, and independently. I did this because I knew that if others controlled it, it would be managed for appearance rather than purpose. Margaret's face drained of color. What purpose, she demanded. The lawyer looked up at her for the first time. That's addressed later, he said. He went on. I leave Riverbend to Evelyn, not because she needs it, he read, but because she understands systems. She asks questions. She listens. She does not mistake proximity for entitlement. My chest tightened. I hadn't realized I was gripping the edge of the chair until my fingers started to ache. Margaret turned to my children. You knew about this, she asked them. They didn't answer, because they didn't know. None of us did. That was the point. The lawyer placed the document back on the table. This codicil was drafted with medical clearance, he said. Your mother was evaluated and found fully competent at the time of signing. Margaret sank back into her chair. But that's not all the lawyer added. He reached into his briefcase again. There are supporting materials, he said. Records, communications, and a statement your mother asked me to preserve in case her intentions were questioned. My stomach dropped, because suddenly, this wasn't just about inheritance. It was about evidence. And as the lawyer prepared to explain what else my mother had left behind, I realized something that made it hard to breathe. Riverbend wasn't the surprise. It was the beginning, and whatever came next was going to explain why my mother trusted me with everything she never trusted anyone else to see. As the lawyer gathered the pages back into a neat stack, something shifted inside me. Not relief, not triumph, recognition, because once you know the truth exists, your mind begins to replay everything you once dismissed. I thought of the emails I sent my mother late at night, written carefully so they wouldn't sound demanding. Just checking in, just asking how she was feeling, just saying I missed her. Some were never answered. Others came back short and oddly formal, as if someone else had typed them. Doing fine, busy week, talk soon. I had accepted that. I told myself she was tired. That age changed people. I told myself distance was normal. But sitting there now, with Riverbend Holdings laid bare on the table between us, I began to see patterns I had ignored for years. The lawyer cleared his throat again. There are communications attached to this codicil, he said. Emails, phone records, calendar entries. Margaret stiffened. What exactly are you implying? She asked. I'm not implying anything, he replied calmly. I'm presenting what your mother documented. He turned a page. I am aware, he read from my mother's statement, that messages intended for me, and from me, have not always reached their destination. My breath caught. I have had calls redirected, he continued. I have been told Evelyn is unavailable when she is not, and I have been told I am unavailable when she has already arrived. Claire's hand moved toward mine, then hesitated. The lawyer kept reading. There were holidays she attempted to visit that were canceled at the last minute. Explanations were given on my behalf that I did not authorize. Margaret stood again, her voice sharper now. This is outrageous. She was confused. She forgot conversations. That happens. The lawyer looked at her steadily. Your mother anticipated that response. He turned another page. She asked me to preserve records, he said, including phone logs, and written instructions she left for household staff. Household staff? The word seemed to echo. Margaret's confidence wavered. Daniel looked up for the first time. What instructions? He asked quietly. The lawyer hesitated just long enough for the room to feel it. Instructions to ensure certain calls were answered by others, he said, and that certain visits were discouraged. My stomach twisted. I remembered a Christmas 2 years earlier. I had driven in without telling anyone, thinking I would surprise my mother. I was stopped at the gate. Margaret had met me there, arms crossed, voice firm. Mom's resting, she had said. It's not a good time. I believed her. Later I learned my mother had been home all week, asking why I hadn't come. The lawyer continued. I have also documented financial irregularities, he read. Funds transferred from accounts without my direct instruction. Decisions explained to me after the fact. Margaret slammed her palm on the table. We handled things because she needed help, she said. That's what families do. Families don't isolate, the lawyer replied evenly. The room went quiet again. I felt a strange mix of grief and clarity wash over me. It wasn't just that I had been left out. It was that my absence had been curated, managed. I looked at my children. They looked at me differently now, not accusing, not defensive, confused, because they were realizing that the version of events they'd been given might not be complete either. The lawyer set the papers down. Your mother believed, he said gently, that if Evelyn were fully informed, certain dynamics would change. Margaret laughed bitterly. She's turning us into villains, she said. After everything we did. The lawyer met her gaze. She was very specific about that, he said. He read one final line from the page. I am not accusing anyone of malice, my mother had written. I am documenting behavior. The difference matters. The air felt heavy. Margaret's face had gone pale. Daniel swallowed hard. I realized then that this wasn't about proving who loved my mother more. It was about control. Who had it, and who had been denied it. The lawyer closed the folder. There is more, he said quietly, including a personal statement your mother recorded. Margaret's eyes widened. No, she said. Absolutely not. But the lawyer was already reaching for his briefcase again. My heart began to race, because documents explain decisions. But recordings? They explain intent, and whatever my mother had chosen to say, in her own voice, was going to make it impossible for anyone in that room to keep pretending. Margaret's objection still hung in the air when the lawyer reached into his briefcase again. No, she said louder this time. You're not playing some dramatic recording. This is already enough. The lawyer didn't argue with her. He simply looked down at the documents in front of him and spoke calmly. Your mother anticipated resistance, he said. That is why she asked me to gather corroborating information before any recording was ever mentioned. Corroborating. The word landed like a weight. Margaret folded her arms tightly across her chest. You're turning caregiving into a crime, she said. We stepped up when Evelyn stepped away. I felt my name echo strangely in the room. Stepped away. I leaned forward for the first time. I didn't step away, I said quietly. I was told not to come. Margaret turned toward me, eyes flashing. You chose your life, she snapped. You chose distance. You don't get to rewrite that now that money's involved. Money. It was always money when explanations ran out. The lawyer raised his hand again, stopping whatever Margaret was about to say next. Let's be clear, he said. This is not about caregiving. This is about authority. He opened another folder. Over the past 4 years, he continued, there were multiple transfers from accounts your mother controlled into accounts managed by others. Margaret scoffed. She authorized those. She questioned them. The lawyer replied, repeatedly. He slid a page across the table. These are written inquiries from your mother, asking for explanations. Several went unanswered. Daniel leaned forward now. What transfers, he asked. The lawyer glanced at him briefly. Travel expenses, he said. Home renovations. Vehicle purchases. Claire's eyes widened. Those were for Grandma, she said automatically. The lawyer shook his head. The documentation does not support that. Margaret's voice rose. She lived well because we made sure she did, she said. She deserved that. No one is disputing comfort, the lawyer replied. We are disputing consent. The room went silent again. I felt something inside me harden. For years, I had been painted as the distant one, the uninvolved one, the daughter who chose convenience over responsibility. And now, piece by piece, that story was collapsing under its own weight. Margaret turned to my children. Tell him, she said sharply. Tell him how involved we were. Daniel looked at me, then back at his aunt. You handled things, he said slowly. But I don't remember Grandma ever explaining them herself. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed again. The lawyer continued. There were also changes made to access permissions, he said. Email passwords updated. Phone settings altered. Margaret laughed, but it sounded brittle. She asked for help, she said. Technology confused her. The lawyer nodded. She did ask for help, he said. And then she asked for independence. He flipped another page. When those requests were not honored, he continued. She began documenting. My chest tightened. I imagined my mother, sitting quietly at her desk, writing things down. She never intended to say out loud. Not to confront, not to accuse, just to be remembered accurately. Margaret's voice dropped. So, what are you saying? She asked. That we controlled her. The lawyer met her gaze. I am saying she felt managed, he said. And she did not consent to that management. Margaret turned to me again. You let this happen, she said, by not being there. The words stung, but this time they didn't stick. I was there, I said steadily. Just not where you wanted me. Claire reached for my hand. I realized then that the room had shifted. Margaret was no longer directing the conversation. She was reacting to it. The lawyer closed the folder. There is one remaining piece, he said. One your mother believed would clarify everything. Margaret shook her head. No, she whispered. That's not necessary. But the lawyer was already removing a small dark flash drive from his briefcase and placing it on the table. This, he said quietly, is a recorded statement. Dated, time-stamped, accompanied by a physician's assessment of capacity. My heart began to race. Not with fear, with certainty, because documents can be debated. Records can be challenged. But a voice doesn't forget. And as the lawyer reached for the laptop beside him, I realized that whatever my mother chose to say next would end the argument entirely. Not because it would be cruel, but because it would be unmistakably her. The lawyer didn't rush. He connected the flash drive to the laptop with the care of someone who understood that timing mattered just as much as truth. The screen glowed softly as the file loaded. Margaret stood abruptly. You are not playing this, she said. Her voice trembled now, stripped of its certainty. You can't humiliate us like this. The lawyer looked up at her calmly. This recording was made at your mother's request, he said. She asked that it be played only if her intentions were challenged. He turned the screen so everyone could see, and then he pressed play. My mother appeared on the screen, seated in the same law office we were in now. She looked older than I remembered, thinner, but her eyes were clear. "Alert! My name is Helen Carter." She began, her voice steady. "I am recording this statement because I want my decisions to be understood without interpretation." Margaret froze. Daniel's breath caught. Claire squeezed my hand. "I am of sound mind," my mother continued. "I have been evaluated by my physician, and I understand exactly what I am doing." She paused, just long enough for the weight of that sentence to settle. "For many years," she said, "I allowed others to speak for me. I told myself it was easier, that it kept the peace." Her gaze shifted slightly, as if she were looking at someone just off camera. "It did not," she said. The room was silent. "I love both of my daughters," my mother continued, "but I have watched one of them be slowly pushed out of this family without ever being told why." My throat tightened. "I have been told Evelyn was too busy to visit," she said. "I have been told she didn't call, that she had moved on." She shook her head gently. "I now know that is not true." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "I have seen messages go unanswered," my mother said. "I have asked for calls that never came. I have been told things on Evelyn's behalf that she did not say." Her expression hardened. "That is not protection," she said. "That is control." No one moved. "I am old," my mother went on, "but I am not confused. I know when decisions are being made for me instead of with me." She leaned forward slightly. "I changed my will because I recognized a pattern," she said. "One of access, one of exclusion, one of entitlement." Margaret shook her head, slowly, tears welling now. My mother continued, "I chose Evelyn because she asks before acting, because she listens, because she does not mistake closeness for ownership." My chest ached. "I did not leave Riverbend Holdings to punish anyone," she said. "I did it to protect it." She paused. "And to protect Evelyn from a story that has been written about her for years without her consent." I felt something inside me break open. All those years of wondering if I had imagined the distance. All those nights of guilt. She saw it. She knew. "If you are watching this," my mother said, her voice firm, "now it means someone has questioned my decision." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "That does not surprise me." Margaret let out a quiet sob. "I want to be very clear," my mother said. "I was not pressured. I was not confused. And I was not manipulated." She took a breath. "I made these choices because I wanted the truth to survive me." The screen went still for a moment. Then my mother added one last thing. "To Evelyn," she said softly, "if you are hearing this, know that I never believed you walked away. I knew you were kept away." Tears blurred my vision. "And I am sorry," she said, "for not stopping it sooner." The video ended. The screen went dark. No one spoke. Not Margaret, not my children. Even the lawyer remained still, hands folded, giving the moment space. Margaret sank back into her chair, her face pale. "That's not fair," she whispered. She didn't mean it like that. But the words sounded hollow now, because meaning had just been replaced by clarity. The lawyer closed the laptop gently. "You are free to contest the will," he said. "If you choose to do so, this recording, along with all supporting documentation, will become part of the public record." Margaret looked up, fear replacing anger. Public record? I realized then that this wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about exposure. And as the room sat in stunned silence, I understood something with absolute certainty. My mother hadn't left this recording to hurt anyone. She left it to make sure that when the truth finally surfaced, there would be no way to bury it again. The argument everyone expected never came. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit, no vows to fight this in court delivered with confidence. Because once the video ended, something fundamental had shifted. This was no longer a disagreement between siblings. It was a matter of record. Margaret stared at the dark screen for a long moment, as if waiting for it to turn back on and soften what had just been said. When it didn't, she turned to the lawyer, her voice quieter now. "So what happens next?" she asked. The lawyer didn't answer right away. He gathered the documents, neatly stacking them with the kind of care reserved for things that would soon be examined by other eyes. "That depends," he said, "on whether you choose to contest the codicil." Daniel leaned forward. "What does that involve?" he asked. The lawyer met his gaze. "It involves disclosure," he said. "Financial records, communications, testimony. Everything your mother documented and everything connected to it would be reviewed." Margaret swallowed. "You're saying all of this becomes public?" "Yes," the lawyer replied, "if you proceed." Silence filled the room again. I watched my sister's face as the implications settled in. Public records don't care about intention. They don't care about explanations offered too late. They care about dates, amounts, signatures. The lawyer continued, his voice steady. "Your mother requested that a forensic review be conducted if her decisions were challenged," he said. "That process would examine transactions from the last several years." Margaret shook her head. "This is excessive," she said. "Families don't do this to each other. Families also don't isolate one member while controlling access to another." The lawyer replied calmly. Claire shifted beside me. "Would that include—" "Everything?" she asked, quietly. The lawyer nodded. "Every transfer," he said. "Every authorization. Every instance where authority was exercised on her behalf." Margaret's hands began to tremble. I realized then that this was the first time she wasn't trying to win an argument. She was calculating exposure, because numbers don't respond to charm, and timelines don't forget. The lawyer slid a thin packet across the table. "This is a preliminary summary," he said. "It's not exhaustive, but it outlines the scope of what would be reviewed." Margaret glanced at it and then pushed it away. "I didn't steal from her," she said quickly. "We used funds to manage her life." The lawyer inclined his head. "That distinction," he said, "is precisely what courts examine." Daniel looked between us. "So if Aunt Margaret contests this," he said slowly, "what happens?" The lawyer answered without hesitation. "An independent accountant is appointed," he said. "They reconstruct financial activity. Intent is inferred from patterns, not explanations." I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time since we sat down, I wasn't bracing for impact. The truth no longer felt fragile. It felt inevitable. Margaret leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. "You're threatening us," she said softly. "No," the lawyer replied. "Your mother prepared you." That distinction mattered, because threats are meant to scare. Preparation is meant to withstand scrutiny. The lawyer closed the folder. "You are free to take time," he said. "Consult counsel. Consider your options." He paused. "But understand this, if you move forward, the narrative will no longer belong to you." Margaret looked at me then, really looked. For years she had spoken over me, around me, about me. Now she searched my face, as if hoping to find hesitation. I didn't give it to her, because whatever happened next, it wouldn't be shaped by my silence anymore. The lawyer stood. "We will file the codicil," he said. "As written." Margaret's shoulders sagged. The meeting ended not with resolution, but with something heavier. Finality. As we gathered our things, I realized this wasn't the end of the conflict. It was the beginning of accountability. And as we walked out of that law office, I understood that the next phase of this story wouldn't be driven by emotion. It would be driven by spreadsheets, court orders, and consequences that didn't care who felt wronged. Because once the truth enters the legal system, it stops asking permission. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It never does. It crept in quietly, disguised as routine. A meeting postponed. A phone call not returned. A neighbor who suddenly crossed the street instead of stopping to chat. Margaret didn't contest the will. Not formally. But she didn't accept it either. For weeks, she told anyone who would listen that this had all been a misunderstanding. That lawyers exaggerated. That family matters should stay private. The problem was, they didn't. Once the codicil was filed, the record existed, and records have a way of surfacing. The first shift happened at church. Margaret had always sat in the same pew, third row on the left. She sang loudly, confidently, like someone certain she was being watched with admiration. One Sunday, people stopped sitting beside her. Not dramatically, just gradually. A space appeared. Then another. Whispers replaced greetings. Someone asked her how her mother was doing, and then remembered too late that she was gone. At the grocery store, conversations paused when Margaret turned down an aisle. At first, she told herself it was coincidence. It wasn't. Charleston isn't a large city. Once you remove the landmarks and look at the circles people actually move in. News travels through book clubs and volunteer boards faster than it ever does through headlines. Did you hear I thought she was the one taking care of everything? I guess not. I heard about most of it secondhand. I wasn't present for the looks or the silence. I had already stepped away. Margaret's social world, however, had no such distance. Her position on the local foundation board was quietly reconsidered. No explanation given. Just a polite email thanking her for her years of service. The invitation slowed, then stopped. Daniel called me one evening, his voice unsure. "Aunt Margaret's really struggling," he said. "She says people are judging her without knowing the whole story." I closed my eyes. "They're judging what's documented," I said gently. "That's different." There was a pause. "She's angry," he added. "At you." I expected that. Anger is easier than reflection. Margaret sold the River House before the season ended, quickly, below asking. The house that had hosted so many holidays, so many carefully framed photographs. I drove past it once out of habit. The windows were bare, the porch empty. It looked smaller than I remembered. Margaret's children began distancing themselves quietly, not out of loyalty to me, but out of self-preservation. Reputations ripple outward. They don't stop at the source. The stories online didn't help. Someone posted an old photo of my mother with a caption about family trust. Someone else commented with a link to public filings. The thread disappeared within hours, but the damage didn't. Margaret stopped posting altogether. No updates, no explanations. Silence replaced narrative. And silence is rarely kind. I felt no satisfaction watching it unfold, only a strange heaviness. Because collapse isn't loud when it's deserved. It's quiet, lonely, unavoidable. Claire asked me one afternoon if I felt vindicated. I thought about it carefully before answering. "No," I said. "I feel finished. Finished explaining, finished doubting, finished carrying a version of myself that never fit." Margaret sent one message, just one. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an accusation either. It simply said, "I didn't think it would end like this." I stared at the screen for a long time. Neither did I, but endings rarely match expectations. They match behavior. As the weeks passed, I noticed something else. The tension in my chest eased. The constant vigilance I didn't know I carried began to fade. I wasn't waiting for the next call anymore, or the next explanation, because there was nothing left to clarify. The family image that had once felt so solid, so unquestionable, had collapsed under the weight of truth. And as painful as that was to witness it, made space for something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Not the triumphant kind. The quiet kind that comes when you realize you no longer have to prove who you are. The quiet that followed surprised me. Not the empty kind. The honest kind. The kind that doesn't demand answers. After the estate was settled and Riverbend Holdings was formally transferred, I didn't celebrate. I didn't tell many people. I signed documents in a small office with neutral walls and fluorescent lighting the same way people sign medical forms or school permissions. Carefully, deliberately. When it was done, the lawyer slid the final paper toward me. "This separates your financial life completely," he said. "No shared access, no contingencies, no future claims." My hand hovered over the pen for a moment. Not because I was unsure, but because endings carry weight. Then I signed, and for the first time in years, my life was no longer entangled in someone else's version of events. I moved slowly after that. No grand relocations, no dramatic changes. Just a smaller apartment near the water. Morning light, fewer obligations. I brought only what mattered: photographs, books, a box of letters my mother had written but never mailed. I read them one by one, not for answers, for understanding. In one letter, she wrote about how hard it is to admit when love becomes conditional. In another, she wrote about how silence can look like peace until you realize it's control. She never blamed anyone directly. She didn't need to. Riverbend Holdings became quieter too. Not a symbol, a responsibility. I kept it exactly as she intended. No expansion for ego, no flashy displays, just steady work. We supported small rental properties, local businesses, people who didn't need speeches, just consistency. Every decision I made, I asked the same question my mother had written in the margins of her notes. Who does this protect? Claire visited often. Our conversation shifted. Less defense, more curiosity. She asked questions she had never asked before. About family, about boundaries, about what it means to stay when staying costs too much. Daniel kept his distance, not out of anger, out of uncertainty. I respected that. Some relationships don't break. They pause. Margaret never reached out again. I heard fragments through others. A smaller house, a quieter life. I didn't wish her harm. I also didn't invite her back into my silence. Both things can be true. One afternoon, I walked past the old river house again. The new owners had painted it white, changed the shutters, removed the swing from the porch. It looked like a different place entirely. And maybe it always had been. I realized then that my mother hadn't given me Riverbend to replace the family I lost. She gave it to release me from needing one that couldn't hold me honestly. That understanding settled into me slowly, like a deep breath you don't realize you've been holding. I stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen, stopped explaining choices to people who had already decided how they felt. I learned something unexpected in that stillness. Peace isn't earned by endurance. It's earned by leaving rooms where your value is debated. I began volunteering twice a month at a local community center. Nothing formal, just helping older women understand paperwork, finances, letters they were afraid to open alone. I never told my story. I didn't need to. I could see it in their faces, the relief of being believed without having to prove anything. That was enough. On the anniversary of my mother's passing, I stood by the water alone. No ceremony, no speeches, just gratitude, not for the inheritance, for the clarity, because clarity doesn't shout. It doesn't accuse. It simply allows you to move forward without dragging the past behind you. And as I walked away from the river that day, I understood something I wish I had learned sooner. You don't owe loyalty to people who only recognize you when it benefits them. You owe honesty to yourself. And once you choose that, everything else finally falls quiet. If there is one thing stories like this reveal, it's that family conflict is rarely about money. Money just gives shape to something that has existed for years. As someone who has spent decades studying family dynamics, inheritance disputes, and emotional neglect between generations, I can tell you this with certainty. The most damaging wounds are not caused by what is taken. They are caused by what is controlled. In many families, one person slowly becomes the gatekeeper. They manage information. They decide who gets access. They speak for others without asking. Over time, this control is mistaken for care, until the truth finally surfaces. What made this story different wasn't the size of the inheritance or the legal outcome. It was the quiet preparation of someone who understood that truth does not always win in conversation, but it does survive in documentation. Helen didn't leave chaos behind. She left clarity. And clarity has consequences. For those who watch this and recognize pieces of their own lives in Evelyn's story being overlooked does not mean you lack value. It often means you are in a system that cannot benefit from seeing you clearly. You are not required to stay in rooms where your worth is constantly measured, debated, or rewritten. You are allowed to step away without explaining yourself. Healing does not always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like peace. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived through family betrayal, quiet manipulation, or the long road to reclaiming your sense of self, take a moment to let us know. A simple like helps these stories reach others who may need them. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to this channel. We share stories like this not to encourage division, but to remind people that truth, accountability, and healing can coexist. You never know which story might help you make sense of your own. And if you're carrying something heavy, tonight remember this one person believing you, even silently, can change everything. Thank you for listening.